internet. So welcome, Felix. And now we see on the screen Dr. Svetlana Slipchenko. So and welcome, Felix. And now we can. Shall I continue? Now we see and welcome Svetlana Slipchenko. Do you hear us?
Yes, I did, finally.
Okay, great to have you. I was in the introducing round, and I will introduce your person right now. And then we can start with the discussion. So she is director at the Center for Urban Studies, an NGO in Kiev, and is a senior research fellow at the Institute of Philosophy at the National Academy of Science of Ukraine. She has been visiting professor at Kiev National University of Construction Architecture, at the National University of Kiev Mohyla, and at the Kharkiv School of Architecture. And she has also been a visiting scholar at the University of Cambridge, University of London, and the University of North of London. She is editor and also contributed to various series, for instance, Urbanism and Feminism, Public Spaces and its discontents or contents, and the Politics and Practices of Urban Renewal. So as you can read or conclude from this publication, her interests include urban studies, gender and feminist studies of architecture, urban anthropology, philosophy of art and architecture. So welcome, Svetlana. So my name is Sabine von Lewis. I'm coordinating the research cluster of conflict dynamics and border regions here at ZEUS, and I'm very happy to chair this session, especially since we currently, and we talked about this earlier today, trying to apply for funding to support researchers outside Ukraine who had to leave the country, but also those who are still in the country. So the Russian war in Ukraine has devastating consequences for many aspects of life, and we want to look at universities and their situation, but also consequences for the present and the future of research in Ukraine. I think many of us have the pictures of the bombed Kharkiv University in mind, and also know researchers who left the country or still are in Ukraine. So we will address the following questions in this discussions. So what can transnational academic networks do to support displaced researchers and students and to uphold cooperation with Ukrainian universities? What research options does the war leave for those who were forced to flee and for those who stayed? And at the same time, the challenge of rebuilding Ukraine poses a question about the self-positioning of universities and society in general. What role can they play in this process as knowledge-producing institutions and as civic actors? And finally, what can be done and should be done to uphold research and universities in Ukraine? The three panelists have prepared short inputs, and I think we will listen to them first, and we will start the discussion with each other. So I think I will give them the chance that you can react to each other on your inputs. And then we will later on open the discussion to the audience here in the room, but also the YouTube followers or listeners may send questions that will be addressed or can be addressed here to the panelists. So I think we will start with the views from Kiev, and I would propose if you are ready, Svetlana, to start with your input, then Timothy will follow, and then Felix.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to join your discussion. I think it's crucial for not only for today's Ukrainian universities, but to the university in general, to the concept or to the idea of the university. In a day, I will be doing a lecture for our students, for the students of our summer school, on the subject. And I will start with a quoting of John Goddard, a scholar who actually was doing his research on the universities, who observed that there are two key questions that each university should be able to answer. The first is, what are we good at? And the second is, what are we good for? And actually, I would say that there is a soft and very flexible boundary between the institution and the society, and we should admit it today. All universities engage with the first question by attracting the best people and giving them the space to excel. But the second question is far more difficult, I would say. And not only because the role of the universities in the society depends on shifting social context and political climate, but because of how difficult it is for the universities to mobilize a broad and diverse set of academic interests around a forward-looking agenda. Well, to develop a strategy that will, that will encompass academic interests, institutional growth, competitiveness, their civic role, because university is a place-based institution that sees the economic, social, environmental, and cultural life of their local communities as a high priority, and collaborates with other universities and anchor institutions to overcome the challenges that are coming with the future, in the future. So I think it concerns both the universities in Ukraine and the universities in other parts of the world. And of course, we are to speak about the challenges. In our country, there were many ills of higher education and academia, and I, as a member of academia, can admit it, that were already present before the war and the pandemic of Corona. If I list some of them, and I think Timothy will join me and our Ukrainian participants will join me in this statement. So I would stress on the stiffness or rigidity of the university structure and atmosphere, and no will to change the status quo in most of the universities. Another thing is enormously huge teaching load. Then there is virtually no, absolutely, or almost absolutely no time left for any normal research or professional growth. As people to whom I talked to told me, and from my own experience. Another thing is the absence, then it comes, of course, the absence or imitation of research, because of lack of time and resource. And then, of course, we can speak of unprofessionalism of many of staff members, and then their inability to cope with the challenges and changes happening around. We have to stress on the bureaucracy burden left of Soviet times and which is still flourishing now, thanks to our Ministry of Education and Science, as they call it. And among other things, there are tons of paperwork imposed on teachers because of the administrative staff shortage. Besides, the majority of the universities are really unwilling to exercise or practice the principle of autonomy. To me, it is crucial to the university well-being. And of course, it results in poor financial standing and thus poor social standing of the professors. Then it results in brain drain. We still speak about bribery in the universities, the problem of aging, and other things. What we can do to support, or what international community and Ukrainian research and teaching community, university community can do to support academics and people who are doing research and who teach at the universities. I would propose, so there are already open possibilities, temporary research or teaching programs for those who fled the war in our country. But I would stress here on the temporary, because I talked to my colleague from Penn State. She's American, and she's the head of the board for placing the Ukrainian academics and students. And we were discussing this problem of the temporary, of which term is okay for people to stay over in at the university, because after 3 or 5 years of working or staying in the country, people won't be not able, but people could be reluctant to go back, because they would be they will have their social connection, they will have their job, their kids will go to local schools, and so on and so on. So it causes the problem of the brain drain. What could be done? For example, their university started the program of teach-in program. So when Ukrainian scholars do online classes, seminars with their colleagues from other universities, for example. Of course, could be collaborative research program, projects on equal footing with the colleagues from the West, because from my conversation with a colleague here in Kyiv from our University of Construction and Architecture, so I was told that sometimes they felt that they are not taken, on equal footing, not taken as equals. So they, for example, it concerns their classes and their approaches to this comprehensive planning, for example. So I would stress the idea of the equal footing with the colleagues from the West. And of course, grant programs for individual and group research, which have already started, and projects, but within Ukraine, not to enhance this brain drain. And of course, it's important. You can have this bureaucracy. You can have this formality. You can have this Soviet heritage, whatever. You can have this university professors, as we call it, from the past, mastodons, but individual initiative is extremely important. Of course, we should enhance, or we should we should enhance, I would say, the partnerships with private businesses and local governments and municipalities, because if we speak about the university as a place-based institution, there could be started or launched lots of municipal programs to involve the university and to involve research to resolve local problems or other things in local community. And of course, it's very important to have the possibility for Ukrainian scholars to formulate their research agenda when they're applying for the grants, because sometimes you do have this agenda is formulated by people, councils, whatever, abroad, who don't know or who do have certain let me see, could you have certain already formulated agenda, and where sometimes your research interests or the research interests of the group of Ukrainian scholars wouldn't fit. So to me, it's also important. I think we can start, of course, this discussion. I just put forward several of my thoughts, and so collaboration with local communities and municipalities, collaboration with foreign with the universities and grant institutions abroad, and I think it's important for this survival of in our country, because the war has brought about lots of new challenges. For example, we are very uncertain situation with the student enrollment this year. So they don't know how many students they will have. Their funding or the funding for the universities is state programs, and I think private funds already have cut considerably their programs and the money. And the salaries of the professors at the university are not competitive at all today. So people have at our national universities or state universities, which we have lots of. I don't know how many we do have in our country, but there are a lot. And the state universities can't compete with this with private institutions. Perhaps there are some points to start or to start the discussion.
Thank you, Svetlana, for your input and thoughts. And I think we go on to Timothy.
Yeah, thank you for your invitation, and thank you, Svetlana, for your very structured and informative talk. I don't think I can say anything deeper than Svetlana has already said, but I will just try to improvise, and I will try to give you my perspective on this subject, and I will share some of my experiences with the audience, concluding with some possible remarks on what can we do together to support Ukrainian education. So yeah, I think there were two excellent questions posed in the very beginning. What are we good at and what are we good for? So in my humble opinion, universities are of course, universities that have broader, bigger mission in societies, but sometimes, for convenience, we can narrow it down to some very specific functions. And universities are repositories of human capital. And I think it is important to keep it in mind. I will just give you a few examples. Back in 2014, there was a massive crisis in Ukraine, and our university made this strategic investment. We decided to direct our education to support economists, specific economic education, so people can then work in the National Bank of Ukraine to stabilize financial system, to increase capacity of financial institutions in Ukraine. And it was a bit risky and bold move, because everyone was saying, like, look, we are in the crisis. Why should you invest in education now? This is pointless. You should reform the country first, and then you should build new educational programs. And yet we invested in education. And now, fast forward in 2022, after this terrible full-scale invasion, the financial system worked relatively okay. And it worked relatively okay because we had a lot of experts and a lot of people who penetrated, National Bank of Ukraine, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finances. So, it is very important to bring this human capital to the system, so the system can be resilient and reliable in the times of crisis. And that's what we are here for, today. Universities also have to think about our human capital, what can we bring to the table to make the system resilient right now. I think after the invasion, we started doing things that we were not trained for and things that we did not plan for. So, for instance, we were able to organize some fundraising efforts to support army, or to support people in need, displaced people. And as of now, our fundraising team within the university, we have a special department for fundraising, and then they fundraised more than $30 million, which is a huge sum. And we were not trained to do that. We did not have special expertise in that. But the thing, what we had human capital. We had human capital, which we just unlocked and redirected to these new tasks. And I think this is a big, sort of a lesson to all universities, that sometimes we underestimate ourselves. We kind of, due to all these problems, which Svetlana just described you very eloquently, all these issues with bureaucracy and poor resources and social status of scholars and universities, we sometimes forget about our own mission and our own resources. But I think it is very important to be able to unlock this human capital in the times of crisis. So, and that's why I think, these are telling examples to support the idea that education matters, university matters, and we should invest in education and universities during the crisis. We don't have to wait for the crisis to somehow to be solved. We can make these risky decisions and to invest and to support education now. So how can we do that? What steps can be done? Let me start saying that a lot of international universities are very generous and are very supportive already. We have received a lot of support from European Union, from North America, from Global South. So there were a lot of countries that hosted our scholars and students. A lot of universities provided their own scholarships, dormitories, funds to support displaced students and to provide some help. So we are very grateful for that. But I think that still more things can be done. And these steps, I think, are not so complicated. Drawing from my own experience, I can tell you that in the very beginning, during the first weeks and first months of the invasion, not a lot of universities, surprisingly, actually listened to our needs. So basically what happened is that a lot of universities, they just initiated some protocols that were developed for the conflicts or crises in the past. But these protocols, not always they fit the present crisis. For instance, I think a lot of universities disproportionately allocated more resources to sort of hosting positions. A lot of universities, they say, well, we can open a postdoc position here or a full professorship there. We can invite a few guest lecturers, to support those who are in need. And this is very nice, but I think there was a miscalculation that in fact, most of Ukrainian scholars and students, they needed a support in Ukraine. Not everyone were able to travel to Western universities, but also not everyone had this preference. A lot of people wanted to stay in Ukraine, closer to their families, closer to their communities. And Ukraine, despite the war, despite this terrible invasion, is still a functioning society. We have a functioning government, we have functioning infrastructure. There are cities that are safe and secure. So we do have capacity to teach, and we do have capacity to conduct research. But it is true that we have lack of financial resources. So there were quite a lot of universities that after long negotiations and convincing did unlock these resources and redirected their resources to support Ukrainians in Ukraine. I think it was a very important step. I can give you an example. For instance, Viadrina University is one of these excellent universities, but also University of Toronto, UMass in the US, University of Pittsburgh, there's Washington University, Northwestern University. What they did, they created the so-called non-residential fellowships, which was a legal mechanism to transfer money to Ukraine, which also showed their flexibility in creativity and also their empathy, their desire to listen to Ukrainians and what they need. And also another thing that can be done, I think what can be very helpful is to have some sort of a proactive position here. Quite a lot of universities, in my experience, I've been doing a lot of diplomacy and meetings and pitching and convincing, and I was meeting I don't know. I think I signed more than 47 memorandums of understandings now with different universities. So I was in these negotiations, and I think I was naively, as a early. I myself, a young person, early career researcher, so I naively romanticized and all these big universities. I thought, they're so big and powerful and wise, and they will come and they will help us. But in fact, it was me, a tiny scholar from Ukraine who had to come up with a proposal, with pitching and with some sort of convincing. So, and I think I felt this lack of leadership in Western universities, that sometimes they just did not know what to do and they were waiting for us to tell them what to do, which is, maybe to some extent logical, but I think, after 6 months, after 6 months of looking around, re-evaluating, rethinking the position, I think it's a good moment for Western universities, to take more robust leadership position and develop their own plans and strategies to support Ukraine. And the final thing that I think is important for international universities to think about is the issue which Svetlana also raised, is the issue of brain drain. Of course, in the long term, what we all want to do, I think we're all here on the same page, that we want, we want to support displaced Ukrainian students and scholars, but with a long-term goal, so these people can come back to Ukraine and rebuild the society and the government. And again, I want to praise the efforts of the Viadrina University, who has already been doing a lot in this respect, and there are many other universities who understand this and they support Ukrainian students and scholars with this intention that they eventually will come back. And it's a bit counterintuitive, on the one hand, how can you solve this puzzle? On the one hand, you need to unlock some resources, and be flexible and help these people, but on the other hand, you want them eventually to come back. So you kind of invest in these people, but then these people, they go away back to Ukraine. It's a bit counterintuitive game. So it's an issue of how not to undershoot and overshoot here. And this also means that it requires a lot of managerial skills and, tailoring each case. And that's why I think it's very important, to do what we've been doing with the Viadrina University. We've been meeting a lot. We've been, developing plans, to work on this as really partners, and I think this kind of mentality is very important here, to think that both sides, Ukraine and non-Ukrainian universities, are actually partners who are working on the same cause. And I think this is a weird place for me to tell it, because this audience, I assume, knows it. And, specifically Zois and Viadrina has already invested so much in this mentality, but I still would like to send this message across, to everyone who is watching us online. Everything else is technicalities, so I guess I can tell you more, if you wish, during the Q&A session. So thank you for listening, and I will pass this virtual microphone to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy, for your honest and also critical comments and contribution to the discussion. I think it gives a lot of food for discussion for later on. And I will now give the word to Felix Zackerman.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. I regret that Tim and Svetlana are not with us, because they could actually listen to dropping water. So we are sitting in the very center of Berlin, in a very up-to-date office facility. And I'm just thinking what this dropping water could be a metaphor for. First, it could be a metaphor for German support for Ukraine still being on the way. It could be a metaphor, like in German we say, steter Tropfen höhlt den Stein. This means that if the water drops regularly and long, it will finally provide some change. And in the very end, it's about infrastructure in Germany, which is not always as advanced as you would expect. I wanted to start with claiming that the actual expert on the topic we discussed today are you, and are in the room. because many of you still are doing their studies. Many of you had to leave their place. Many of you had to adopt to the new realities brought to Ukraine by the Russian war. And I just spent a couple of years in archives doing research on Brigitki prison in Lviv, mainly sitting in dry places and reading old German documents, you know, about where the prison director had beer after work and other issues. The most, for me, the most impressive moment in the history of Brigitki prison was actually the day when some male prisoners were able to move from the second floor to the first floor, because there were some Ukrainian students who just been imprisoned by the Austrian authorities, and they were so noisy in the prison that it was possible to dig a hole in the wall. So there was a news in the newspaper on the next day that some male prisoners made their way to a female cell downstairs in Brigitki. So this is how I spent basically my last years doing research on this kind of stories. So that's very far, of course, from all the issues just discussed. So I will take maybe a different stance. I have been teaching at European Humanities University. This is a university in exile, which had to leave Minsk in 2004 because already back then the repressions by the Lukashenko regime were quite strong. And as we were being based in Vilnius and had some programs for students at the university in Vilnius, place-based as it was just put. At the same time, we had some distance learning courses taught already back then via Moodle, and my main concern working there was about this Belarusian university in exile being embedded in a very problematic way, still trying to struggle to uphold ties with Belarusian society, and at the same time being forced to adopt to the EU nomenclatura and to Lithuanian the Lithuanian legal frame in order to uphold the higher education in exile. And if we look from this perspective and ask about embeddedness, I think that really, as it was already mentioned, not just the time of the pandemic and the crisis related to the impact of COVID-19. I think that we are in a radically different situation than 5 years ago. And this is mainly because of the quality of the internet. Even in Germany, we have broadband internet, and as if I understood properly, also in Ukraine, the quality is really high, and Zoom allows to connect at the very time very different dimensions of being embedded. And I think that's really important, that it is in fact possible already today, and many of you experienced this, that you can be at the same time at home with your family doing finalizing some of your thesis or having classes on your mobile device. You are connected via all kinds of social media to some kind of to various communities, and there's still a strong local dimension for those who are connected to a local university, which is an important player in Kharkiv or in another town which is not occupied at this very moment by Russian troops. And at the same time, the university is already, as Tim pointed out, is already in a global setting. It is possible to have teach-in from the US, from Central European University, from the UK, also from Germany. And I think that this really changes the whole setting, because it is not about the question whether you do it in this particular place, or you do it for the local community, or you interconnect with some global community of scholars. But it is it is possible to manage with this at the same time. And of course, there is this question about resources. And my main point about resources, what I have learned in this Belarusian case, is that we tend to underestimate the state as a crucial institution which is actually framing and legitimizing academia in all known academic cultures, and also in all successful academic cultures. The state is playing a major role in providing a legal frame, but also in providing the resources to do actually not only teaching but also research. And I learned in this case of the Belarusian university in exile that if the state is absent per definition, in this case because the state was the cause why the university had to leave, it is very hard to uphold a regular work. And in particular, this has an impact on research. So teaching you will always be able to organize because there is popular demand in some areas at least. But in order to provide resources for somebody like me really going regularly to an archive and focusing on this alongside with teaching, you usually would have some kind of involvement of a state. So this, of course, in Ukraine, we have the Ukrainian state. We know that its capacities to provide resources is limited. Also, due to the war, it is even further limited. But still, it is there. And I think that's important. That's important. And my last point is even more historical. I think if we think about World War II and the case of Ukraine, I would argue that the outcome of World War II was a forced globalization for those Ukrainians who left or who decided to make this choice, if they had such a choice, to go to West Germany. So we have in Germany the Ukrainian University in Munich as like a far echo of this. I would argue that this is an example of a university structure or quasi-university structure which is not so deeply embedded in the German system, and that may be a reason why it is not very visible and not an important player now, even in this situation. And it is absolutely vice versa in case of the US and Canada, where you all know that there's a strong academic community being explicitly supported by the Canadian exile community. And you know better than me the long-term impact of the academic knowledge which has been produced over decades by these Canadian research centers and also the Harvard Ukrainian Studies Center. And even in the 1990s and 2000s, they still played an important role of bringing knowledge, ideas, narratives, and so on to Ukraine. So I think what we experience today is like a second phase of forced globalization of Ukrainian academic networks, and it is as after World War II. It's the situation that there's a need to make this decision whether you stay in your country or you leave for Poland on a temporary basis, or you try to make your way to the UK or to the US. This situation has been enforced on these Ukrainian colleagues of mine, but still they have some agency in this, and I think that's important. And last point, we are all training. What does solidarity mean today? Also being embedded or working in German institutions, and there are good moments and bad moments. For me, it's a hard moment to come back from some kind of summer and to notice that there is actually a problem with not only with the water dropping at Zeus, but really with popular attention and this first quite intensive feeling of empathy and of attention and of interconnectedness with what's going on in Ukraine. I see a big problem here in Ukraine, also in German academia, like to follow up with this and really to make what we just started or what we tried to start, like to make it more, like to take it to next year. And I'm also saying this as somebody who tried to support Belarusian colleagues after the 2020 protests. And it turns out that there is an issue, there is a difference between reacting to a crisis, or in this case to an ongoing war, and then to make this support more long-term. I think that that's a major thing. But I have a tiny hope here, and like this example Timothy just gave with these non-residential fellowships, for me is like a tiny sign that there is something occurring. And I'm speaking about not the war itself, but the way how Ukrainian communities are able to react to the war inside Ukraine, like all these communities who already were displaced after 2014 and now are very supportive for those who had to leave their homes now, but also these networks between Ukraine, Central Eastern Europe, and also the West of Europe. I think they make a difference, and there is something we can learn, and there's something there is some change which has to occur among us. Actually, absolutely impossible to have something like this in Germany before, because it does not fall in line with the institutional thinking and the bureaucratic setup of how we usually spend academic support. So for me, this is a sign that there something already changed, and yeah, let's discuss now how to work on this further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felix, for this input. And we also earlier already talked about this hope for the possibility of this non-residential fellowship, and it was already raised many times also earlier in discussions with Ukrainian scholars what is needed, but it also not only Ukrainian bureaucracy is intense, also German bureaucracy is intense to finally get there. Well, thank you for your input, and I actually wanted to ask both of you, Timothy and Svetlana, if you want to react, and maybe I connect this with one question Felix raised, the role of the state in like every country in every academic system. What is the current Ukrainian position of the Ministry of Education, Science towards researchers, universities, research to be done? Maybe you can say something on that.
Okay, we will try. It's not a simple question, in fact. So yeah, this question has many layers because it's about position, but it's also about capacity, and it's also about coordination. So of course, the Ukrainian government and specifically the Ministry of Education, they would like to somehow support students and scholars. So there is a process of relocation. The universities that were destroyed in the east and the south, they receive some governmental support to be relocated. There are some international efforts. So when the President Zelensky, he travels around the world virtually and talks about support to Ukraine, he also pays attention to education. He had this special meeting with 30 American universities. He presented in Oxford. He presented in Paris School of Economics, I think, or was it Sorbonne? I don't remember. So symbolically, they want to bring support to Ukrainian education and science. Unfortunately, not much has been done in terms of, improving financial situation. It's not easy to help there with the lack of resources. I think there is some sort of in my personal opinion, there is sort of a naive thinking that Western partners, they will eventually come to Ukraine and will help Ukrainian universities to rebuild. So I feel this kind of anticipation from the Ukrainian government that they're waiting for some international resources. But I think it's a bit naive in a way that it's not how it works. You should offer some plans, some ideas and vision how education can be restored and be sustainable. So it's a tricky process. I think I want to focus on positives because it's easy to focus on negatives during the war. I will give this compliment to the government that I think what I see is quite a lot of endorsement to private universities. So I represent a private university, and there is an endorsement to what we do. We received endorsement from the government when we initiated this Ukrainian Global University Initiative. We coordinate with Ukrainian Catholic University, and we receive at least public symbolic endorsement of our initiatives when we raise some issues in public. So I think, at least what's happening in that the government has incentives to search for additional resources, for additional models of how to solve the crisis. So they endorse activities of private universities, which is not often the case, because usually private universities are seen as competitors to private initiative, to governmental initiatives in Ukraine. But again, I'm just talking out loud here. It's a bit a messy process. I think the bottom line is that the government suffers quite a lot, and I think it's also, I sometimes even think about it as our own responsibility, so that private universities, they should support the government in this crisis. So that's why there are several initiatives that private universities announced publicly that they will support students from the territories that are under occupations. I think this global Ukrainian university was also, we framed it as a support to government. So yeah, I think that's a small positive note. But in many other respects, of course, there is a crisis. So what can I say?
Thank you. Svetlana, you wanted to add something on that? And I want to raise your hand electronically if you want to say something. We try to see it.
Well, just a couple of things. Of course, the state universities can't compete with the private universities. They are smaller, they are more dynamic, they do exercise their autonomy, and they know how to do that. And this huge machine, government or state machines, they just can't do that. What I mean that everything is put upon people or staff members. It's as we do have this. We started the master program in urban and regional studies within the National University of Architecture and Construction. And actually we experienced lots of not very good things in there. So it's another story. It could be told in other circumstances, but I think individual initiative is very important and should be supported. And that's what I wanted to say. Of course, there is it's a challenge. A war put a big challenge on the state university and on the system of education. I don't know much about the policy of Ministry of Education in Ukraine. It's not my field of study or field of my particular interest. But, well, I wouldn't criticize them now, but perhaps people do know who is the Minister of Education, what the person is. So we don't have much confidence in this person and in the ministry led by the person. So I'm sorry, I'll finish there. And perhaps people will ask.
Okay, thank you for this. And maybe you wanted to say something? No. Maybe come back to another question or issue I think you, Svetlana, raised, and I hope I understood correctly while also following the dropping water, you, I think, were mentioning the kind of international support for research or research institutions, research in Ukraine, but that maybe this does not really fit the interests of what needs to be researched in Ukraine. Maybe you could specify on what should be done, what should be researched, and what could be a supporting framework for you to do this then, and to that these programs might apply for the interests of Ukrainian researchers and institutions. Do you hear me? Did you hear me?
Yes, I somehow automatically assumed that this question was for Felix, but we can.
Oh no, it was actually well, it can be addressed to all, but I think the Ukrainian colleagues might be the perfect match to answer it. What would be the ideal context or framework for supporting research in Ukraine from the international research community, funding institutions, and so on?
Okay, I guess just for convenience, to follow the order of previous answers, I will try to say a few words, and then Svetlana will add. And Svetlana, she has already pointed out, yes, so she said that it's important to consider local agenda and to take Ukrainian voices into consideration. So I think that, there are many fields in science, obviously, and everyone can have their own opinion. I just think that I would love to, for me, this is not a question about specific topic or specific research question. To me, this is more a question of scientific management and the design of, the research teams and the research budgets and everything. To be frank, I don't really care about the topic. I just care that Ukrainian scholars in any international team has to have, a legitimate way to say what they want to study. So that's it. I think in sociology, in economics and history, people can say something. In physics and chemistry, they can say something else. But I just wish Ukrainians to have more voice and more trust. I think one of the reasons Ukrainians are not always trusted is there are very legitimate reasons. We live during the war. So maybe we can be either too short-sighted or too emotional to propose some specific research questions. And also due to the lack of international collaboration, sometimes, there are quite a lot of Ukrainian scholars who are not so experienced in international collaboration. So maybe because of that, we are usually not often given this, huge freedom in deciding research questions. But I think, again, with some efforts, with some tailoring, with some investment in these building teams, it is quite possible to find, a partner in Ukraine, someone who has international education, someone who has local respect. I don't think it's such a, it's not an impossible task to arrange it. So for me, it's more a question of, management and planning. It's not a question of ideology or research questions for me. Yeah, over.
I would agree, absolutely agree with Timothy. It's more a question of management and of the ideology as a whole, not about the concrete topic of your research. And I think it will be important and it will be useful to have a kind of international team, for instance, where people of different countries could collaborate on the same project, doing some little, bringing in their specific aspects. Another thing, of course, now, and we now profit of it, we now can benefit of it, that more funding are open to Ukrainian scholars, as Felix put it. It is a second wave of globalization of Ukrainians, like forced globalization, I would say. I would put it like that. So people perhaps didn't want to leave their homes and to flee, but they were made to, they had to. So I think that it will work once, you know, the universities should develop their ability, or their departments of international communication, how would they call it, to help scholars, to help teachers, to find colleagues or topics where they could fit, for example. So I was told by my colleague from the National University, from the Department of Sociology. So their department, the international department, is often very helpful and open to collaboration, to any initiative. As I was told, I don't have my personal experience working with the department. So I think it's the good way to know, because before, from my own experience, for example, from participation in international conferences and all, like for one or two people from Ukraine, there were like more than 100 people from Russia. So now we do have an opportunity to voice our research agenda and to be visible and present in the international community. So I think we should benefit, we should profit of it, we should make use of it.
Okay, thank you for these proposals and clarifications. And I think Felix, you wanted to add something.
I wanted to inform Tim and Svetlana that the water stopped dropping. I don't know what does it mean, but let's not discuss it now. I just wanted to follow up and say that this whole, like, first of all, of course, we should include World War I, and there was also a big wave of forced migration and people sitting in Berlin in the very end of World War I, when already after the Bolshevik revolution, and we're really thinking what to do and where to go and what to start. So this is already the third major frame where we have this situation. But I wanted to maybe think critically about what globalization also means, because I think that what just Tim and Svetlana said, the need to have a voice in the research design making and the ability to decide on yourself, I think this is a hint to existing asymmetries. And of course, they are linked to the way how the resource funding is directed. So we have a very, like, as was also pointed out, the resources the Ukrainian side can provide are mainly human resources, highly educated, young, mobile population. This already almost sounds cynically, sorry for that. But I want to point to another problem that like part of these hidden, like this is a non-hidden asymmetry. It is in fact, this is a problem in all research settings, that it's not even about the person providing the funding deciding, but the framing is usually made in a quite unconscious way, provided also in institutional terms by the side which is implementing or starting this this project. So from my experience, also working at Viadrina with large-scale programs supporting mini grants for the research of World War II memory, was that already in the initial phase, when you start to brainstorm, when you look for partners, that it has a very decisive impact on the way how the project is carried out. And so it is also very important that the Ukrainian partner is involved in this setup phase, because otherwise it will be very hard to make this implementation. And last point about asymmetries, I think there's a problem about language, because as we sit here, we already assume English as being lingua franca, and that's totally fine. Also, as you hear, my English is very German, so we are all handicapped in a different way, and let's say, but this is not the full story. So for instance, I had a German research grant to spend a year in London, where I actually, at London School of Economics, where I actually studied with Gwendolyn Sasse, and I had courses about ethnic conflict on Crimea with her. So my resources, the resources provided in the setting I grew up, to somehow catch up, not just with English, but with the whole web of meanings, of practices, and of how to say, cultural capital linked to it, were quite different to many Ukrainians who were forced now out of their hometown universities, particularly the smaller ones and those who are not in Kiev. And I came across, this is not a critique, but just rather observation, that there are very different cohorts of Ukrainians now on their way and on searching for being involved, and this ability to the way their potential ability to find an equal way of communication depends to a very large extent on their prior experiences. So if they studied abroad, if they did their PhD at Central European University, if they had an exchange year somewhere, they have a different way of being interconnected via English because of their prior experiences. This does not mean that somebody who spent their full studies or did a PhD at the Academy of Science is incapable of doing so. But a lot of these asymmetries I was talking about in the beginning is related to this, like to hidden things, which I would like you could use Bourdieu and cultural capital to somehow explain them. And so I think there is still a problem of us being somehow in a very natural way sticking to English and assuming that this will work fine.
Well, thank you for this contribution. And I think looking at the watch, I think I want to open the discussion to the audience here, but then also to maybe comments, questions from the followers on YouTube. So are there questions? And we started, I think, 15 minutes later, so maybe we have another 15 minutes to add at the end. Any questions, comments?
Thank you for your comments and for your introductions. My name is Mariana. I'm coming from Ukraine, and I have a question which I would really like to hear answer from all the speakers. Is that up to now and still now, the studies of Ukraine have been very much influenced by the Russian perspective. So there are a lot of chairs, faculties, programs, PhD, master, bachelor degree programs, which even have the Russian studies coming first, and then, Central Eastern Europe, somewhere there. And I think this very much influenced also the situation as we have now, the reaction, the whole surprises, which were coming and related to the war. And the question would be how to change this. And here I think the Ukrainian universities has the same very high degree of responsibility of changing and from the outside. Yeah. And so what that could be done, what we can do as what Ukrainian academia can do being in Ukraine to change the situation, whether it should be changed in the opinion of our Ukrainian speakers, but also what Mr. Zackerman, you think about this as well? What should be changed, how it could be changed, and what the whole ongoing war, in your opinion, will change, how it will change this field of studies? Thank you so much.
Who would like start?
Well, just for convenience, I think we already have established, this routine. So I'll start. And okay, it's a very complicated question. I think you're spot on. The issue is there. It is still there. Your question is how to address it. I have a very perhaps kind of ad hoc, naive perspective on it. So I'm thinking about it not in terms of some sort of a historical perspective or some sort of a wisdom. I'm just thinking about it in terms of very short-term tactical moves, which I've been also doing myself. So I see this as a two-stage process, and one is a sort of social activism, which was very important during the first weeks and months of the invasion. And then the second stage is professionalization. I think it was very important. And I think so many Ukrainian universities, public intellectuals, philosophers, and journalists somehow joined in this effort. So many people attended panels. There was almost this movement, which was not institutionalized, but it was there. People really wanted to bring Ukrainian voices and to address this unfair situation that there are no, everything is disproportionately overrepresented by Russian scholars or Russian scholarships, and something has to be done. And another important part of this symbolic movement was sometimes to abstain, not to show up to the panel, to say, well, there are some Russian scholars, I will not speak at this panel. So it was very important to do, just to raise awareness, just to show this very strong, symbolic commitment to the idea that, something is going on, we need to draw attention to it, and we need to rethink the status quo. But I think now I have this intuition, gut feeling that, it's a good time to make the next step. I think quite a lot of international actors, universities, they are already kind of aware of this issue. So it is a good time to be more professional and to start, after all this social activism, now the whole world is watching. So now we have to say something substantial. So I think it's a good time to be more, to be well prepared. I don't think it's a good time to avoid panels. I think right now we have to go to all panels, regardless if there are some Russian or speakers or not. I think it's a good time to give our proposal. So if you have some vision of, sort of Ukrainian studies, it's a good time, to propose this vision to the international audiences. In my case, in the case of our university, what we aim for several things. First of all, we want to shift this discussion and to make it more global. We don't want to, I think it would be wrong to focus attention only on Ukraine. I think it's not really wise, and it will make us look bad. I think it's important to, to speak about this conflict at the global stage. We have to address the global south and food crisis and food shortages globally. It's not just about Ukraine, it's about global security and, how Ukrainians are treated, that maybe Ukrainian studies were underrepresented. We can say the same about many other nations. So I think it's a good time for us, to start building this more global perspective. And when we set up this bar higher for us, it will be, sort of a good challenge, to grow with during this crisis. So yeah, sorry, I know that I did not give you some specific bullet points, but at least let me try to do it now. Let me try to give you a few bullet points. So first, to attend panels and sessions and conferences, to work on your professionalization, to participate in the international research, and to discuss global issues together with local Ukrainian issues. So this will be my bullet points.
Thank you. Svetlana, you want to comment something to it?
I would just put forward one more issue to publish. publish in English worldwide, because the information, for example, I'm doing this urban studies, and people who were coming over to Ukraine, scholars and others who didn't know Ukrainian, they shouldn't speak Ukrainian, you know, once you are traveling or interested just to visit a city once in your lifetime. But I was told that there is a total lack of information about Ukraine abroad. So we have to produce this information in popular and in professional level to make valuable input. What our center is doing now, me and colleagues, we are, for example, working towards having conference on post-colonial, like colonial legacies with my friends from the University of Charleston and Catholic University in the States. Actually, it's my personal contacts, but we decided that we'll do it, and we will do it internationally. We will not speak about only Ukrainian issues, but we will touch upon, we will have people worldwide, actually, from Hong Kong, from Africa, from Nigeria, from Eastern Europe. So we have lots of discussed together. And actually this concept of post-colonialism could be and should be, now we understand it, because before it was quite fashionable, but now it could be applied to the post-socialist or post-Soviet territories and states. So how to do, and then we would like to publish the volume. So it will be our little input into the questions.
Thank you. I think that is an important point. Felix, you wanted to, maybe from the...
Yes, I mean, I think, like just to give you an example, when I went to London, I took a program, it was a Master of Science in Russian and Post-Soviet Studies, right? It's a good example. And Gwen Sass was actually there, one of the leading figures. She's now the head of this wonderful research institution. And it's just a small semiotic example that you would subsume a whole range of countries as post-socialist, and then at the same time assume that Russia is somehow not post-socialist. Like, so it's very strange. I decided afterwards to go back to Frankfurt Oder, and I myself made a conscious choice to do something in between Russia and Poland, because in the field of Eastern European history, in a German context, like there's this very old-fashioned logic, which is still very much 19th century, that you should do, if you do your PhD on something around Moscow, something what is somehow related to the Russian Empire, you should do your habilitation or postdoc on something what is not related and a different century. So, and there's a long-term impact of this internal academic logic in this very narrow field of Eastern European history, which means that you would usually do something on the Russian, like if you do 19th century, you would do it on Russian Empire, and then you do 20th century something about Poland, or usually it's Poland or Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia, or the other way around. Like if you do Soviet, like you do Soviet Russia as a 20th century field of studies, then you have to move on. And the outcome, the long-term outcome is that actually almost all scholars in my field speak Russian. And there's a smaller amount of people who speak also Polish pretty well, but the number of scholars who are fluent in Belarusian, Lithuanian, or Ukrainian, like there are like less than like 10 in the case of Belarusian, less than 5 in the case of Lithuanian. I think like there are 3 or 4 of them, and this has a long-term impact on the way how things are carried out, like how research is set up. And it creates a very specific situation now when particularly female colleagues from Ukraine arrive in Germany, and there are supportive colleagues in the field of Eastern European studies. They would be surrounded by Russian-speaking colleagues from Russia and Belarus in many places, just because of the networks from the late 20th century. And I think that's a problem. And I mean, Tim gave a hint that in this this setting, it's impossible to just say, okay, now it's time to create Ukrainian study centers everywhere. I think it's unrealistic. There is one in Frankfurt-Oder, and I think Frankfurt-Oder is a good example that this university moved on, has been moving on for the last decade, because there were only 2 institutional reactions to 2014 in Germany in academia. It sounds a bit weird, but it is. I think it's true. It's the creation of this particular research center where we are now, Zeus, which includes this overview, a very broad overview of post-Soviet countries, but includes Russia in a somehow equal way, and not making it a particular strong case or half of the research. And the chair for Ukrainian studies or Ukrainian entangled history in Frankfurt-Oder, which is led by Andrei Portnov. You may have met him. So and it's also no secret that he only received half of a chair because he's Ukrainian. So this is just an example how things work out in Germany, right? That there is, even in these places where there were some changes made, it's still halfway in a way. And I think in this setting, it is important to introduce Ukrainian language and to somehow try to implement the Ukrainian research agendas, but to interconnect them with others. I think that's the only way. And there will be this problem that in many places and in many universities in Germany, it is possible only if Ukrainian colleagues find a way to interact with Russian colleagues who left Russia after the war started sometimes earlier. I think this is a problem that until the war is going on, this situation is, I understand that it's totally problematic and unacceptable for most colleagues, but after the end of the war, hopefully soon, there will be a question about how to relate Ukraine. And it's, so it's not, I think it's not just, the decision is not just to switch all the, to make Kiev the main center of Eastern European studies is somehow unrealistic. But of course, the Russian politics and the war itself will be helpful in making this shift, because all the archives in Moscow, which are really important for my field, are closed for a long time. So all colleagues who now think about their PhD and habilitation, they will come to Kiev very soon. And they will go to Vilnius and they will go to Warsaw. So there is some kind of post-colonial move in this sense that Russia will be also impossible to reach for us. And I will for sure not go there to carry out research in the next time.
Well, yeah, we raised a lot of aspects now that connect with some hopefully shifts, but also unfortunately ruptures in future research. On Eastern Europe and post-Soviet space, but there's another question Kerstin, I think, wants to raise.
Kerstin Bischel, I'm now working at the Zeus, but my question is based on my pre-Zeus experience, if I would call it like this, because I have spent some time in Göttingen and worked on a double degree with, I have to say, at Russian university, which of course existed for just 3 months. So my question is, especially to the Ukrainian colleagues, but also to Felix Zackerman, because you talked about, on the one hand, this shift and this rupture and a lot of research now moving on to Ukraine. And I think Timothy also said it's the next step for professionality. So I'm personally interested to what extent you would say there is a chance in the next time for kind of double degrees on the bachelor, but also maybe on the master level with German, Russian, Ukrainian. I really apologize for that. German, Ukrainian double degrees. So to what extent is the Ukrainian academic community, and I know it's really hard for you now, also from what Timothy just told, to what extent is there now the space, the time to think about these really long-term programs? And on the other hand, this other side of my question would be, to what extent have you experienced kind of getting it more easy to have this double degrees academic partnerships, because I know it takes a long breath to do these programs. It's like steter Tropfen hüllt den Stein. The long-lasting drop finds its way. So thank you very much.
No, thank you. Thank you for thinking about that. Okay. I'm not sure if I can answer your question precisely. I just want to say that it is, of course, in great interest of many Ukrainian research institutions and universities to build up long-standing partnerships. It helps to develop capacity. It helps to develop professionalization and mobility. The exact framework, whether this is, joint degree, double degree, or some exchange or whatever, I don't think that, we should dwell on these questions. I think that each university can decide on their own. I can tell that our own university have managed to develop a new joint program with the University of Toronto. And we started doing this maybe 3 or 4 days after the invasion. So it was March 2nd or March 3rd when we raised this question with the University of Toronto, with our colleagues. And, after 3 months of working, we pulled it out. And I don't know how much I can tell, on public. I hope I'm not saying anything, that I should not speak of, but we also have some partnerships with the Viadrina University, and this is not dual degree or something, but still it is a very complicated process of accepting Ukrainian students for full degree in Viadrina, so then they can come back to Ukraine and continue their careers in Ukraine. We cannot call it, double degree, but I would value it even more than double degree, because we are talking about long-lasting professional and cultural relationship between, two universities. So I think, my personal lesson from the past 3 or 4 months is that flexibility matters a lot. We have to think about big goal, what we want to achieve. We want to achieve professionalization. We want to achieve partnership. We want to achieve high training for our students. And then, the exact mechanism, I think in this respect, we can be flexible. With some universities, it can be double degree. With other universities, it can be joint grant. With some universities, it can be exchange. We will figure it out. The most important, is just to have this motivation and flexibility. Yeah, over.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear what Timothy said, all of it, because of my connection. But what I would like to tell is that actually when we started our master program in urban and regional planning within the university, within the state university, we started it with this idea in mind that we are moving towards this having 2 degrees or 2 universities.
We lost you for a moment, Svetlana.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you again.
Yeah, because it says that I have unstable internet connection. Is it okay now?
It's okay. It seems to be okay now.
So we started our program, master program in urban plan and regional planning, with the idea in mind that we are moving toward this having double degrees with the German university. We do have partners in Cottbus University, but to operate this huge state machine, it's not to be flexible and mobile and dynamic as the private small or little institution could be, which depends on itself and it doesn't have this overarching bureaucracy and all this stuff. So, but I think it should be flexible and it should require lots of administrative or this bureaucracy work or paperwork.
So even before the summer, I received an email by Tim from Kiev asking actually to set up something like a joint program, even 2 months before I start my new job in Hagen. So he is very proactive, and I would say that he is better organized than me because I was busy moving my family from Warsaw to Berlin, and I will just start next week. And so I will have this in mind, and I think there is a political question behind your question, and this is of course about the way how DAD deals with the fact that actually it was basically thrown out of Belarus and also is impossible to act in Russia very much. So I think that there should be an additional support for this kind of programs. And of course, there is another problem, like being based on the fact that not all of the money is, like you physically cannot spend all the money that they usually spends in Belarus and Russia, basically due to the war and ongoing war, and also due to the repressions in Belarus. But there's also another issue, Svetlana just mentioned, that like if I compare DAD with NAWA, like the Polish organization, which is basically a clone of DAD, but having a Polish agenda, they are the Polish organization, which was just recently created a few years ago. Of course, it is much more able to really act and to react and to adjust to the situation. And I think there's something broader, and it's not about the water, which is now definitely gone and it's dry now here above us, but it's about a strange incapability of Germany as a state, but also us as a community, I would say, and many institutions, and I would say the German society at large, really to react to change, which already occurred. Like so this is something I found important when living in Warsaw, that Polish society basically, not just colleagues who studied Eastern European history, but basically it was very clear what is going on and that you have to react to this because it is a major shift in history and in the region. And I would say that Germany is part of this region, but Germans don't understand, like, yeah. But and for a strange way, even East Germans, yeah, we are here now in the east of Berlin. I grew up, by the way, not far from here, and East Germans do not understand that what is going on in Ukraine is about their future as well. And I can see a direct link from this problem to DAD being somehow very slow and somehow not having a vision actually how to change itself in order to be able to react to a world which already changed. So it's not about change which will occur in the future, but it already occurred. And that this is what is going on in Ukraine. And this is why we have to change ourselves, our institutions, the way how we carry out research and how we cooperate. And in the end, this change will occur here, but it will take some time.
Well, thank you for this kind of engaged call for more engagement of German researchers and German society, and also maybe research funding. I wanted to say we have maybe time for a last question.
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Victoria Grivina, and I'm a PhD student at the University of St. Andrews. And I have first a short remark/question. Why do you think that it is unrealistic for Kiev to become a new center? Because I think, in my opinion, I have been working with Kiev archives throughout 2020, 2021, and I found, for example, the archive of SBU of former KGB, one of the most open. And I think it is more realistic actually than thinking that at some point 50 years from now, Moscow will open its archives or what is left from it. So this is just a small remark about that, but I have, there's been another concern, at least in our academic circles in UK, about the shift of the scholars who used to be heavily focused on Russia, and suddenly they feel the fresh blood and shift to become experts in Ukraine, while some people who've been working on Ukraine for years and years might be overshadowed by this star sort of researchers names. What is, in your opinion, a way out of this situation, and how can we deal with that in academic circles? Thank you.
Okay, as usual. I share the skepticism as well. I mean, I'm myself Ukrainian. I have this ambition. I want Ukraine and I want Kiev to become an intellectual center, not only of, Eastern Europe, but beyond. But I also, I have my own reservations. And I think it's not just about archives. It's not just about access to data. It's also about how we design our, research mindset, to what extent we invest in education, theory, methodology, etc. I am a sociologist by training, and sociology is very vibrant in Ukraine. We have so many polling companies, qualitative researchers, marketing studies. We have collected and produced amazing data. For the past 30 years, we have accumulated so many fantastic data sets. But you know what? The people who are actually publishing in international research journals, and people who are not just, do it for predatory reasons, but people who actually push the boundaries of the scholarship, people who contribute to theoretical debates, they're mostly not Ukrainians. So it's not just about having access to data. It's about, having this something more than that. It's about having the whole architecture of universities and academia and etc. So if we really want to become a center, we have to think about all these complicated questions, to think about the global world, to think about theories, to think about methodology, to think about complicated ethical questions. We were just talking about, having panels with Russian scholars or having some joint issues. Most of Ukrainian academics will not touch this subject soon, but we have to be able to address these issues. So I think it will take years and years for us to become truly intellectual center for all that reasons. We have excellent people, we have human capital, we have a lot of data, but we need a bit more than that, and it will take years for us to become, very influential academic center. But I'm still an optimist. That's why I'm in Kiev. I hope, I will see this in my generation time as well. So, over.
Svetlana, you wanted to add something? Or Felix, you want to?
I don't think so, because Timothy is absolutely right about his aspirations and current possibilities in our country. Of course, our academics, most of them won't speak the same academic language as their colleagues abroad do. Is this a problem? I think we could overcome it in a couple of years of, again, having our scholarly exchange, research exchange, publishing, and all. Once people will be coming, I owe my academic interest and career and all to Central European University of the mid-90s. And I don't think when Soros established his institution in, of course, in Budapest, it's one thing, but then we had this college. I actually attended the college in Prague. When he established this college in Prague, with the idea in mind to change, to influence, to develop, to help to develop these Eastern European countries. So the Prague then was not the center, intellectual center of the world as well, but it takes time. So once we will have, for example, I'm dreaming of, for example, having either departments or joint departments or like partnership, very close partnership with their universities abroad. Who knows, in a couple of years, we will be able to speak out and to be on equal academic footing with the other world.
Just very briefly.
But now we attract attention, you know, at the center of where something is happening. And something, you know, the unknown territory once, you know, appeared visible and something is happening and all the world would like to know what's happening, what's actually happening, and what is the country which is at the center of this problem. So I think we should benefit from this interest.
So I think you catched me. I mean, in a way that I was not saying that it's impossible. Because I think it is possible, and like Putin is working very hard on this end, and I would just remind of Germany, which became a totally peripheral state because it started the Second World War. It had a disastrous impact on German academia because the brightest persons basically were forced to leave in the 1930s. For many reasons. One of them was because many were Jews, and very few came back after the war. And this is something we can still, like you would still feel in German academia, that it is very provincial. It has now special programs to bring people back. Like for instance, Gwendolyn Sasse is having such a grant to bring her back from the UK. And this is a far echo of World War II in a way. So I would say that there might something similar happen with Russia, and the best, like the most important question here, of course, is the language, because Germany stopped to be lingua franca in many fields because of the war. In many important fields of the humanities in many countries in Central Eastern Europe, it basically stopped to be the lingua franca in general, but also in academia. And I think that we are now witnessing something very similar in regard to Russia. And I can see, for instance, among Belarusian colleagues who switched to Belarusian because of the war, not because of the repressions in 2020. So I think there is something changing. And to answer your second question, I'm not able to answer it, but I would just say how I'm thinking about, like how I would do it myself. Like for instance, I think I should do something. Going to Hagen and doing public history, I should do something about the ongoing war, and I will be working on the way how autobiographical narratives are being created during the war, and how social media plays into this. So I think it makes no sense that I do a Ukrainian project. I will combine it with Belarus and Russia myself, and then we'll look for colleagues who are ready, able, and willing to collaborate. And one of the ideas is to collect autobiographical interviews and to support the Lviv Center of Urban History, having this network all over Europe. And there's also one in St. Andrews. So Diana Vonok is working on this I think in your university. And so I would stick to this kind of collaboration where you would have different insights. And I would bring my Belarusian studies insight into this and somehow try to make this work and speak to each other. And I think that this might help also to make Kiev great again in regards to academic, like as an academic center, which goes far beyond Kiev itself.
Well, thank you. I think that was a very kind of good concluding and optimistic outlook. And I actually was trying to summarize, but I think I will let's stand this as it is. And I think since the water stopped dropping, the heat increased in this room, and I think we are all ready now for maybe a cool drink. I thank all of you for your contributions, and it would be great to have you here in Berlin, and I hope to see you one day here. And thank you, Felix, for your input and also the questions and discussion. And well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.